Daniel, it's great to have you on the show. We've been trying to make this happen. I appreciate your time. We talked a little bit off record. You're doing amazing work, and I really believe that after such a profound NHL career, for you to go on to do the work you're doing right now is really a noble pursuit of making a difference in the world in your own ways. So, in advance to our conversation, I want to thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Thanks for having me, and appreciate your time as well.
So, as a starting point, many listeners will know who you are, but for those that don't, I have some international listeners. Can you just share who you are, where you're from, and the work that you're most known for?
Absolutely. Yeah, Daniel Carcillo from King City, Ontario. I guess my most notable work is that I played 12 years professional hockey, 10 in the NHL, won two Stanley Cups, and fought 164 times. And that's kind of, led me into my second act, if you will, which is concussion advocate, emerging medicine or psychedelic medicine advocate. Using my platform to try to make a positive impact on others and provide hope and let people know that there are other tools, because the tools that we have at our disposal that doctors use right now work a little less than 15% of the time, and they're not good enough. And so I'm taking up the mantle, or at least just showing people what is possible if you have the courage to move past certain traumas, whether they're physical or emotional. And I've got a number of different businesses within the, if you want to call it, a psychedelic industry or emerging medicine industry. And I just really am enjoying my life. I have four kids, and yeah, I'm just happy here living in Florida and moving through it.
Yeah, that's amazing that, you hear so many stories of professional athletes in particular, and having played football at a high level and having teammates go on to play professionally and hearing stories of concussion syndrome and the shit they've gone through in their life. And as you said in many of your videos, you would give away your Stanley Cups in a second for peace and internal happiness. Um, but if we were to backtrack to early days in your life just to set the frame a little more, if we could be a fly on the wall in your classroom, let's say in grade 3 or 4 in, I don't know, King City, is that where you were born?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, what kind of student were you in grade 3 and 4, and what type of young person would we see, and what words would describe you the best?
Diligent, focused, hardworking, and yeah, just laser focus and a lot of attention to detail, even at a young age. Was always seeking approval, wanting to be the best at everything, whether that was, grades in our class, which I always was, or, music and playing the trumpet, clarinet, sports and recess, hockey, whatever it was. I just wanted to do my best, and that was ingrained in me from a very early age, and through my parents and just watching how hard they worked.
Mhm.
And yeah, they didn't take too much crap. We didn't have too much of a leash when it came to chores and around the house and stuff. So very grateful for those lessons, because it definitely applied them in a professional career and in my learnings, up until I graduated high school.
Yes, and there's a lot of talk about this idea of being singular sport focused or multi-sport focused, but were you multi-sport focused? I know you played hockey, obviously at an early age, but what
Hmm.
other sport passions did you have at the time?
Yeah, I did everything. I mean, basketball, football, soccer was a big sport. When the whole skateboarding craze came through, we skateboarded, we played tennis, we rollerbladed, we, did cross country mountain biking. In high school, I played badminton, I threw javelin, I was track and field, really good at track and field. I did everything. So yeah, I mean, the shift to a one sport athlete is, I think somewhat dangerous, especially when you're talking about hockey. because you use such small muscle groups, etc. You know, I was starting to see kids when I first retired and went into coaching. I started seeing kids have meniscus at 14 years old, and
Mhm.
that's the risk that you run if you don't give your body a rest. And I'm definitely a big believer in playing as many sports as you can, and not forcing your son or daughter to be in any sports that they don't necessarily want to be in.
Mhm. And when you think about your transition through junior hockey, um, was there a pivotal moment where, you said this is going to be the time that you move and be singular sport focused? I think it was 17. Were you 17 when you left home to play for Sarnia?
Yeah, I was 16 turning 17. I made the decision like when I stopped like skiing and all that other stuff. I made the decision around 15, right when I got drafted to the OHL. I said, there's a very small window. I understood that this could be taken from me in an instant, in one shift, in one with one injury. Luckily, I was again very diligent, used my skill sets that I'd learned from my parents and in school, and had a lot of attention to detail, and was just a little bit of a student of the game. And I remember making a commitment to myself that I was going to be better than everybody else around me from that point on. And I played double A my whole life. I did not play triple A like every other Toronto kid did. I was not getting accolades at 12, 13, 14. I was just putting the work in, and I got better within a 3-year period than everybody else, and eventually drafted at 72nd or 73rd overall in the world when I
And
was
what were you
17
intrinsically
turning
like?
18.
I guess I go back to that idea of you being 12, 13, 14 years old and being intrinsically motivated. Like for me, I mean, I'm in my 50s now. I literally took books off the shelf to learn how to punt and quarterback because there was nothing, right? And I went on to become a quarterback and a punter all the way through college. Um, and I remember teaching myself the skills and the deep intrinsic motivation that wasn't coming from anybody. I grew up in a very dysfunctional family environment where my escape was football, you know? So when you think of being 13, 14 years old, was there a balance between extrinsic motivation as opposed to intrinsic motivation? And what was your major driving force at the time?
I was just attracted to the sport. I was always a very confused kid. We had a good upbringing, uh, now that I look back on it, but when I was in it, it was it was a little bit difficult because it was just very strict, and I have a very kind of open mindset. I'm a definite empath, meaning I'm more sensitive than most. And the discipline aspect of what my parents, how they were just used to hitting at when kids were growing up, that really affected me. But it affected me to the point where when I got to the rink, I was like, that was kind of a safe harbor. I
Hmm.
was really intrigued by it because there were different rules than life, and I could apply these rules to getting my anger, frustration out on other people. And I've always really liked standing out and being better than everybody else. I take everything as a competition, and that's no different now in business and some of these other things than the path that I'm on. But I had that drive in me from a very young age, and hockey is a great tool. It's a great anger management tool,
Hmm.
and you know it's really hard to play hockey, just like how it's really hard to get up and run every morning.
Hmm.
Your mind tells you that you don't want to do it, and for whatever reason I am well built for the pain of enduring.
Hmm.
And hockey is a lot about enduring, and it's a lot about getting up, not when you feel good, but
Hmm.
when you have those off days. And that's really where you see, you know that's where you see, especially in junior early on, you can just tell that you can tell the guys that are going to make it and that aren't, because on those off days, the guys that are going to make it are still pushing really
Hmm.
hard. And you don't really see too many too many guys take any off days. So, and I was just happened to be one of those people. I still am.
What I appreciate about that is I had a amazing Green Beret on my podcast a few months ago who has gone through a lot in his life, literally grew up in a trailer park, and his name's Herb Thompson, and he talked about this idea of his dream was to become a Green Beret or a Navy SEAL. And then once he actually made it to training and he put the 80-pound backpack on, he was just built to take one step at a time. And when everybody was bitching and moaning around him, all the other aspiring Green Berets, about how hard it was, because they literally tell you, here's your backpack, you're going to walk in an east direction, and you're not allowed to ask how long, you just walk. And he
Mm-hmm.
was just built to take one step at a time and literally put one foot in front of the other. And as everybody's mantras around him were don't quit, don't quit, don't quit, his was take one step, take one step, take one step. And that's what I hear in your story. And when you say attention to detail, I wonder if that's not only like hardcore work you have to focus on, but attention to detail on your surroundings and your the way you observe your fellow players and the way you observe the interactions. And I guess I feel from you, and not knowing you and knowing your story, I feel you're more introverted than extroverted. But can you just share that attention to detail in terms of observing others around you and the interactions and relationships that need to take place around you to be your best?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good observation. I'm definitely more of an introvert than an extrovert. Although I like, when it's a catch 22. I like feeling other people's energy. I like being in different rooms with people that I think that I respect and that are better than me. And, my mom always had a saying. She would always yell at my older brother, we don't look at people that are less than, or we don't look at people doing worse than us. We look up, we look at people doing better than us, and we need to be better. And so I really took that mindset. Like most people, I judge people a lot, right, bad, good, indifferent. I look at people and I look and observe, and I decide if I'd like to be like those people or not. And, when I was in recovery, when I was 25 after two surgeries and getting prescribed a bunch of opiates, I remember being in a room, and I've never heard the concept of asking for help. And this, I was 25 at the time, because there's no weakness and there's nothing wrong, etc. And so, but I walked into these rooms and I knew I needed help, and I heard a man talk, and I liked what he had to say. And so I asked my sponsor, I said, I like what that guy has to say. And he just stopped me mid sentence, said, well, then go up and ask him how he did it, and ask him for his help, and he'll tell you. And I think there's a common thread there. People that are successful, they will inherently tell you, like all of the richest people or the most successful people, they all write books. They all tell you how they did it.
Hmm.
And the one common thread is discipline, like really to the point of almost going insane type of discipline,
Hmm.
and almost like losing your mind in something that you're so passionate about. And, being an athlete, I think why we were so enamored, people wouldn't be able to handle workouts or what we did for a week, let alone 12 years. Like it just wouldn't happen. And you just have to be passionate. And then now that I'm in business, I find that people invest in not necessarily companies, but in people that have the passion to stick it through, because I think really savvy investors know just how painful it is to try
Hmm.
to build something, no matter what that looks like. Whether you're in the service industry or some type of other industry in the capital markets, etc. So I've always, I think, like, and I've told, and I'm not shy to say this, one of my biggest skill sets is listening,
Hmm.
is to watch and listen and feel people's energies, the way they talk, the way they move. I scan the rooms, and I'm just used to that because of hockey. We're moving at 20 to 30 miles an hour and there's no out of bounds and you're trying not to get your head taken off,
Yeah.
you can die. You know, you got steel blades everywhere. If that hits your wrist the wrong way, you're in a lot of trouble. If it hits your neck, there's very real danger. And, you know, there's 10 of us moving at this speed, five on your team, five on the other. And so you just inherently have more vestibular bandwidth to see and watch. And when you're playing your best, everything does slow down, similar
Yeah.
to in life, right? When you feel your best, you're not anxious. You don't have this anxious energy. You're not depressed. You're not worried about the past. You're kind of right in this nice sweet spot of being in the present moment where you're getting all of this information. And the best games that I've ever had when I scored a hat trick in the NHL was when I was not, I barely felt like I was even trying. And for whatever reason, the puck was following me around. And I was just in the right spot at the right time. And a bunch of good things happened. And so, um, that being said, like you got to be really ready for these types of opportunities. And so if you're not putting in the work, it's called blind faith. If you
Hmm.
don't have that blind faith to know that if you do put in this work, that the opportunity will eventually arise, and then recognize when you're getting shots on goal and these other things, but they're not going in, but don't get frustrated. Tailor that back to your life. You're getting these opportunities, you're in business. You know, maybe a couple people have approached you and you almost sold the company, but it didn't happen quite yet, but you got to keep going. All of these things are just signs. And if you're not in the present moment, you'll miss them all. So I think attention to detail, to your point, is by far my biggest skill set, but I've trained it and unconsciously too, by the way, since I was 4 years old, since I was in hockey. And I just really dig being, you know, in the moment, hearing everything. And when I feel the most stressed is when I lose that, you know, but luckily I have tools to be able to bring me back, like exercise and you know, and some of these medicines do that for me as well. It really hones me in.
You know, you just so many gems in that because I'm like processing what you're saying and I'm comparing it or mapping it onto the work that I do, coaching athletes and coaching leaders, and all of the points you bring up are so relevant and so important and so timely, especially in a world of uncertainty, right? And unpredictability. And I want to first start out with your idea of discipline. What I hear in your story is not only discipline, but vulnerability, the vulnerability to lean on others for support. And Dr. Michael Gervais, a performance psychologist, he was the performance psychologist for the Seattle Seahawks. Are you familiar with his podcasting, Finding Mastery?
I've heard of his name for
Yeah.
sure, and I've heard of
S-
that title. Does he have a
Yes.
book as well?
Yeah, FOPO, the fear of other people's opinions, which we're definitely going to go into because
Yeah,
I have a
yeah,
question based on a recent
heard of
video you
his name.
shared, but what Michael talked about in his early days, in his kind of breakthrough, was like his first uh, in the NHL, and the coach of the NHL team. Obviously, Michael doesn't name teams, but he said he was brought in to work with this team, and the coach, the head coach, literally says, "If you're fucked up in the head, this is the guy you want to talk to." So, of
Mhm.
course, who's going to actually go to him to open up and say, I'm struggling with my mental health, my performance? Um, and and then slowly players started to go to him and build a safe, psychologically safe space with him to explore what was happening with them. So the first point I want to make based on that and what you said is vulnerability, right? And you have put yourself out there. You've made yourself so vulnerable in sharing what happened to you during your career. And I honestly believe with everything I've gone through with losing a brother to suicide and another brother to drug addiction and trying to fight my way through playing sport and find my purpose in life and hiding everything and wearing this mask of invincibility and then starting to open up, you give permission to other people to do the same. So what comes up for you when you think of, your ability to be vulnerable to share what you feel your God-given talents are now in order to make a difference in the world and other people, but it begins with vulnerability. So what comes up for you first when you think of the need for vulnerability, no matter how masculine or no matter how great of a superstar athlete you are, in order to be your best, what comes up for you in terms of vulnerability?
Yeah, I just think that being vulnerable is being honest. And if you're not honest with yourself, then how can you be honest with others? And I get this a lot on my social media. Everybody's like, wow, like you're so vulnerable. I'm like, I don't view it that way. I view it as just telling the truth, and I've drugged, I've lied, I've cheated, I've done all of those things. And that's when I was at my worst. And the funny thing is that's when I was in the NHL. There were points of my life in the NHL from 19 to 25 where I received all of my injuries. I was not the most ideal individual, and it came to a head when I got overprescribed opiates, which is synthetic heroin, by doctors, medical professionals, after I had two surgeries back to back in 10 days. I had an orthoscopic hip surgery and I had my abdomen stapled back to my pelvis. And, I view that as such a blessing because I was on a path of destruction. I was almost out of the league. And in a sense that I just didn't have a good year and a half. And because I was trying to play through those injuries, and and that those things saved my life. Now, if I look back on the DUI I got when I was 20 years old that nobody knew about in Arizona, I was, excuse me, 21, served 90 days in jail. It was about 10 days after I signed the biggest contract of my life. That put me into the substance abuse program in the NHL where I had to pee in a cup every 2 weeks. So it held me accountable. I needed that,
Mhm.
and because I was dealing with a lot of trauma, I didn't know it at the time, but the things that happened to me in junior were really difficult. But they also made me the absolute weapon that I was and that I needed to be, and that helped me stay in the league for so long. But at 25, it serves you until it doesn't. And it
Mhm.
was not serving me anymore. And so the opiates helped bring me to a place of, just brought me to my knees really quickly. And I can look back on that and be thankful because I would not have gone to the Stanley Cup finals four times with three different teams in my last 5 years unless I had that DUI in 21, unless I had the surgeries back to back, unless I was prescribed the opiates. And then I was able to ask for help, but I knew where to ask for help because I was in that substance abuse program. And then all of a sudden, I go to Malibu when I have ACL reconstructive surgery, and I just like dove head into like meditation and visualization and breath work and yoga, and I'd never heard of these things before, and I was a professional athlete. We managed the way that we went to sleep after playing from 7 to midnight by drinking beer and by taking muscle relaxers and opiates and Ambien. That's just how we got down after a game. So here were these new tools. They made me more connected to myself and others around me. And I just really dug it. Like one of my favorite classes in school was English. And one of my favorite um subjects of life is philosophy. Like I love listening to Alan Watts and Wayne Dyer and
Mm, yeah, yeah,
Krishnamurti and like all these
yeah.
people. Like I was weird, I still am, but
Yeah.
it's brought
Enlightened,
me,
man, enlightened.
well, it's just brought me to a place of like, because I wasn't always enamored by hockey, right? I was like, this is cool, but like, there's got to be more to just pushing a puck around. There's got to be more to this. So, um, but again, at 25, like I put so much work into it at that point. I'm like, all right, let me try it a different way because that's when all my injuries came. And so when I tried it a different way, when I tried to make connections with people, when I was sober, when I stayed away from the opiates, when I managed alcohol intake, when I didn't have the phenomenon of craving with some of those things, when I prioritized the relationship with myself and then others, and I became a really good teammate. Like I said, man, I had the most success in my life. And I don't necessarily come on to every podcast and quote Drake, but if you live the right way, your luck is a sure thing. And that's what was happening to me. I became somebody that attracted these opportunities into my life. A lot of people think that we get what we deserve in this life. I don't believe that. I believe we get who we are. And that's what's happening to me right now, too. Like I'm a very physically, mentally, and spiritually fit person, and these opportunities or these miracles, as Wayne Dyer mentions them, come into your life when you least expect them. And it's still hard. Like this morning's run, always hard. Cold exposure, always hard. But I got those out of the way by 9 a.m. And then the rest of my day is, it doesn't feel difficult. So being vulnerable to me means being honest.
Hmm.
Being honest to me means being honest to yourself. That is the only relationship that people should be focused on as soon as they wake up and before they go to bed. Because if they're not, then everything else suffers. Like
Hmm.
if I didn't prime my brain last night, my wife's in Chicago. We have 4 kids. I had the newborn. I was up at midnight. I was up at 3. She had a bit of a fever. Like, but I wasn't angry. I wasn't like,
Hmm.
oh man, I'm gonna be so tired. I did the things that were necessary. Then I got up at 7 and I took my kids to school, and then I came back and I was like, I'm tired. I want to go back to bed. But sometimes you do the opposite of what your brain tells you. And I went and ran, and it was hard, but I knew that at the end of it, I was going to come out on the other side of something. So, I think that the vulnerability part is really important. And I talk to a lot of people that I bring on retreats, and if they're not open enough to say, like a guy in our group the other day was like, "Well, you guys look like you're doing so great." Like, I'm pissed, and I'm like, man, like, don't look at that, man. None of us are doing that great, dude. And it's like it's hard for everybody. Life is, but if you put a few hurdles in front of you every day, you have to do it every day. Then it becomes a routine. After 14 days, it becomes a little bit easier, but it's still tough, man. So, finding a community of men is something that we're building. With suicide being so high, and being vulnerable enough to say, like I'm in it right now too, right? Like the last week I've been in it, but I feel like I'm coming out of it now. And if you don't have the hard times, how do you enjoy the good? You know? So hope that
Yeah,
makes sense.
that's amazing. And what comes up for me is George Mumford. Are you familiar with George Mumford's work?
No.
So George was hired by Phil Jackson back in the Chicago Bulls day to come on. George is a 17-year heroin addict
Hmm.
who had this amazing basketball career in college, who played with Dr. J, and then one injury after another, opiates, and then turns on to heroin, and then has a 17-year relationship with heroin where it just takes him under and totally like he grapples with it and he taps out and he's like, I'm fucking done. And then he goes to recovery and he finds mindfulness and meditation and breath work. And then his life
Hmm.
starts to change. And then he starts to train people at the meditation center in Cambridge because he's asked by John Kabat-Zinn, who is this,
I know that
expert
guy.
in mindfulness,
Yeah.
to be a teacher. And then Phil Jackson is friends with John Kabat-Zinn, who says, do you know anybody that can come help us? Because Michael Jordan just retired to go play baseball. And then George ends up coming on board with Phil Jackson, and Michael returns, and then they win 2 more championships or 3 more championships. And then, so he is the mindfulness coach for the Bulls. And then Jackson brings him to LA and he wins 5 with LA and becomes Kobe's mindfulness coach. And what George says is you have to be the eye of the hurricane and
Hmm.
being in the present moment. allows you to be in the eye of the hurricane despite the chaos 360 degrees around you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what matters most, is developing the skill of being mindful and present with everything life throws at you, both good and bad, you know?
Yeah, man. And
That's
embrace it.
and
Right. Like
embrace it.
just,
Yeah. And
I
learn to
think
embrace
there's,
it.
yeah, and train to embrace it.
Yeah.
How do you get more comfortable in the chaos? You
Yeah,
put
exactly.
yourself in more chaos,
Yeah.
and you survive,
And know that
right?
you
And
have the
then
skills to do it.
yeah, and
Right.
then you develop a skill set,
Yeah.
and part of that skill set goes back to the vulnerability piece. I like doing it alone. That's just how I'm built. Other people like doing it in a group, and that's fine, right? But I always come back to, I always go to bed alone. I love my wife, love my kids. They're not in my head, and I'm not in theirs.
Mm,
I need to be spiritually and mentally fit in order to be the best person that they love, that they see. And in order to do that, I need to be selfish. So I tell a lot of people it's okay to be selfish. Like guys that I work with laugh at me because they see how I live my life and how I prioritize the things that I need.
mhm,
And that's the way it is because I'm a man, I'm the matriarch of this house, and I do, without me, I truly believe that this house would not be the same. I
mhm,
don't know if it would survive. So if that's the case, then we have to, and I have to do the breath work. I have to prioritize the run. I have to do the exercise. I have to do the cold exposure. And I have to make sure that I stay within that routine as much as I can. And part of that routine is also advocacy work, is although this was not freely given to me, I can freely give some of it away. Not all of it, but most of it.
mhm,
Because also too, it might sound bad. I know that people, they might do it for a day, maybe two, but if they see me doing it for years on end, now people have seen me say the same thing for 5 years, they start getting a little confident. They're like, all right, now people are starting to reach out and say, you wouldn't believe how many times I've deleted this reach out message, but now I'm ready because I've seen you do it for so long.
Anyways,
Yeah.
I want to continue on this thread, and I want to jump into your post from, I think, yesterday or the day before, because that's what really resonated with me. And what I really appreciate in your video from this week is you talk about the power of the internal voice.
Mm-hmm.
And what you say clearly is this idea that, in your own words, you say the only safe harbor we can create is our own internal state dialogue, moving
Mm-hmm.
inward, and how we speak to ourselves and how we manage our relationship with ourselves. And then this brings up this idea of, I told you about Dr. Michael Gervais, the Seattle Seahawks performance coach, where his book was about FOPO, fear of other people's opinions, and
Mm-hmm.
fear of being judged and what people think of us. And that is the biggest constrictor to human performance and potential. So about 4 years ago, I had Dr. Jim Lair on the podcast. He must be 80 now. He coached all the tennis greats in the world. He was on Tim Ferriss, Tim Ferriss's
Yeah.
podcast, and what Tim put out, like, as this amazing quote that Jim said, is the power broker in your life is the voice that no one hears.
Mm-hmm.
How well you revisit the tone and content of your private voice is what determines the quality of your life. It's the
Mm-hmm.
master storyteller, and the stories we tell ourselves create our reality. And you were going for a run the other day, and you shared that you were going through a difficult week, and that it's important for you to return back to this idea of internal voice and what we say to ourselves. How have you learned, as going through what you went through early on, but through your career, how have you learned, and then retiring and doing the work you're doing now, how have you learned to better navigate your internal voice? And what is your advice to people who struggle with that? Because we would never want what we say to ourselves broadcasted on the Jumbotron game 7 of the Stanley Cup final for everybody to see, right? Because we can
Hmm.
be really shitty with ourselves. So what is your advice there with internal dialogue and how you've managed to navigate that space?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm still learning how to, I guess, how I best respond to my own voice because it was so ingrained from me from an early age to negatively motivate myself, or the negative down talk motivated me, meaning coaches yelling, saying not so nice words that I'm not going to repeat on this podcast to motivate, saying you're less than or you're not performing up to a certain standard, being hard on you, which now I see a lot of people, mindfulness experts or coaches or individuals that haven't been to the top of the mountain, talking about this different way, being more gentle, being more positive, being so. And I think that that can work if you're not a professional athlete or if you're not used to executing. And I think it's also dependent on your view of the world. So, for example, I can only speak in my experience. My experience is that there's still a dog in me, and more like a wolf, and it likes to fight. It loves the fight, and it tends to come out when I am avoiding certain things, when I am the stress comes from not doing the thing, not executing, avoiding knowing what I have to do because the outcome might be too scary. The outcome might be a no. And I don't want to necessarily deal with that. And so I'll avoid and I will defer. And there's a lot of self doubt that comes with that. And when I'm at my best, I am not thinking. I am, as I did in my hockey career, reacting. I am intuitively moving through bodies or through projects with a fast pace. I am not overthinking because the first thought is usually the right one, especially if you are in the moment, in the right headspace. I like the idea of there's not enough information that we could ever take in to ever think that we could ever make the right decision at the right time. There just isn't.
Mm.
There's so much that is out of our control. And so I take this thinking that sometimes I need the wolf. Sometimes I need to operate off of anger. Sometimes that fuels me, and I am not going to beat myself up because of that. Now, for the most part, talking down to myself doesn't work in real life. So, and I'm in real life now. When I was a professional athlete, that is not the real world. That is not real life. There's different rules, essentially different ways of thinking, and you have to be a little off to move through that. Um, so the way that I view this world now and the way that I live my life, I am a little bit nicer to myself. I, but like on the run today, I I'm not yelling at myself, but I am not giving myself any space to make any excuses. And today, the run was all about, as you mentioned, no coincidences in this life. I do not believe in them. Put one foot forward. Do not look down or up, and do not think about the destination. Enjoy the pain.
Mhm.
Enjoy the sweat. Enjoy the pounding of the knees. Enjoy how much your calves are tight because this is 4 days in a row of a new routine of running 4 miles. If you don't like where you are, change it.
Mhm.
How do you change it? Well, this last week I came back from Oregon. We did our first retreat, etc. I was tired. I kept telling myself, I'm tired. I'm tired. And I was okay. And that's like the woke mindset. It's like a virus. And I eventually just got up and I said, no, like, there's no reason for you to be tired. Okay. And maybe you're not doing enough. And so maybe you should do more.
Hmm.
And that is what I did. I did the opposite of what my brain was telling me. So this week I ran 4 miles instead of two. I worked out every single day. I lifted weights, and the internal track talk was there's no excuses there. I will not allow them into my mindset. And I made a contract with myself to consistently run to the end of the 2 mile run. I gave myself a little break there. I take, usually I have these thoughts and sometimes I just stop in the moment and record and then get back to it. Um, and that's when I feel the strongest, is when I make these kind of contracts with myself and I keep them. And being physically fit is being mentally fit, and
Hmm.
being physically and mentally fit is being spiritually fit for me,
Hmm.
because I've spent my whole life working out, sweating, doing things that other people might deem um, unnecessary or too hard, and I deem them as extremely necessary and not hard enough. So that's the thing.
Hmm.
It's like, oh well, you did 4 miles. Well, guess what? My mind goes right to, why didn't you do six? And that's what I try to calm down. It's
Hmm.
that mindset of, well, no, good job.
Hmm.
Remember, Daniel, you don't have a PCL in your right knee. You've done your MCL 4 times. You've done your MCL in your left knee 6 times. You have an ACL reconstructive surgery. You got two horizontal tears in both ankles. You've got arthritis in both knees. You've got the hip surgery. You've got the abdomen. You've got arthritis in both hips. You've got no left labrum. You've broken the nose. You've done the thing. It's like, dude, if I listen to that voice, I wouldn't ever wake up and I wouldn't get going. But like, I have no pain right
Hmm.
now, and I'm 39 years old, and so I guess long-winded way of saying, yes, I'm a little bit more gentle in that sense. I don't beat myself up because I went four and then my mind tells me to go six. I'm like, easy, buddy.
Yeah.
Take it easy. Okay. Like, and then laugh. Like, I laugh, man. I like, life is about, it's not all that serious, and I laugh at it now because there's so much that's out of our control. And the only thing that you can control, it always goes back to, it's me. It's me. And the thoughts that I think become my reality. And I know that
Exactly.
now. And I will not let these viruses or these disease states or this weakness to enter into my thought stream. And I know where I'm going, man. I am living my best life in order to show people that after 7 diagnosed concussions and doctors telling you that you had mild dementia and you have CTE like symptoms and I'm going to die and all these things and there's nothing I can do. Well, I'm here. I've been here for 5 years. I am the best operating version of myself. And if you want that, you can get that too. And
Yeah.
it's not that hard. It just takes a little dedication to yourself and a little visualization of knowing where you're going to go.
Yeah, that's amazing. And in your video, you talked about this idea of, yeah, there's darkness there this week for you, and you might have an hour of darkness or a day or a week, but you're not reaching for the bottle, you're not reaching for the joint, you're not
Mm-mm.
reaching for the mushrooms. You're learning to sit with what you need to sit with, which is mindfulness, being in the present moment, acknowledging what's happening in the present moment with grace and dignity, the dignity of our emotions. And then that's what actually allows you the feeling to use to mask pain. That's what allows that moment to pass and then create the freedom and space to make better choices. And that's what I appreciate about what you said in the video, is like, you're not reaching for those crutches, you're sitting with the shit. You hold yourself accountable, and but you're learning to have some self-compassion, yet you are driven and disciplined, as you said, as a young person, attention to detail, knowing what you need to do to be your best. So that's always going to come shining through in everything that you do, right? And that's what I hear in your story. So there's a lot of deep insight there to share with the listeners who may be struggling with things. It's not just caving into self-compassion and this idea of like be nurturing with yourself. No, you have a mission, you have a vision, you're aligned to your core values. You kick yourself in the ass to get out of bed and you accept nothing but the best from yourself. And that's no different than when you were a professional athlete. So how does that resonate with you?
Yeah, and I mean, you're like the number one thing is like I know what people are thinking right now, right? If you're in some sort of victimhood or this weak mindset, or if you're just in a disease state that you can't just crack, it's like it's not your fault. That's okay. But don't think that being comfortable is going to get you out of it. What gets you out of it is getting up and doing the opposite of what your brain is telling you when you're in those states. That's what I did this week. I was in it, but I was like, man, I'm not going to not feel this. This is here for a reason. You know, these indications that are made up. We did not have this industry of doctors prescribing us these medications, giving us these diagnoses of anxiety or depression or PTSD so often. Why is that here right now? Those indications, if I showed you how they get diagnosed, your head would spin.
Hmm.
There's a simple, it's like 10 questions. What those signs are here to tell you, people, is that something is wrong in your life. And I guarantee you that if you take some time to go on a run and think about it, it will arise. And it's usually coming from a place of avoidance or the stress comes from not doing enough, and the stress could come from not doing enough and avoiding doing the thing that you need to do. Now, I will warn everybody, once you start on this path, you can't go back.
Hmm.
Once you start, even just 1 day or 2 days, and you go through the pain and you get home, you're like, oh my gosh, like this feeling is amazing of like getting through a mile run. I never thought I could do that, or even a mile walk. I don't care what it is, or a mile bike ride. It doesn't have to be, or even a half a mile. Go around the block. It can be anything. But when you get back and you feel that feeling and that sense of accomplishment when nobody else is watching, you're going to get addicted to it. And then when you don't do it, you're going to shame and you're going to guilt yourself. And then you'll do it again. And then
Hmm.
hopefully you'll do it more often. So it's a pretty amazing ride. Life is amazing. I know that I probably sounded pretty serious, but these types of things allow you to enjoy the day, enjoy your kids, enjoy the important things, and enjoy your work, enjoy whatever mission you're on, and so yeah, it's an amazing life if you work it.
Yeah, if you
You gotta
work
work
through it,
it
yeah.
though. Uh-huh.
And Gabor Mate says the attempt to escape pain only creates more of it. And
Oh, it's the worst.
Dr. Carl Jung says the cave we fear to enter holds the treasure we seek. So
No
that's
doubt.
that's all the shit you're talking about right there. And in closing, I really appreciate our time. I know we could go on for hours, but
Well, what I
um,
was actually going to say too, before we close and even offline, I'm in the process, and I really like questions and answer periods and stuff like that. But we could talk about this offline. But I really like the way that you ask questions, etc. And I've found myself to be in a space of trying to explain what a medicine is, as opposed to what, because then the medicine only allows you this opportunity to break the destructive thought patterns. It's the
mm,
mindset and the perspective and the tools around you daily that you use that allow you to change your life. So I appreciate this. And I've been avoiding one thing, and I'm going to say it publicly because it holds me accountable, which is writing this book. And if there's an opportunity and you want to hop on some more, I think it could be useful, maybe to do this more often, in
sure.
an attempt to maybe, pick out some of these gems that can then become chapters. So
Yeah, I would
once you're
love
done
that. And
moving, you know.
And what I love is, having lived in Japan for 10 years, so, leaving Windsor, moving to Japan, and Japanese culture is amazing. And they have this, Japanese pottery is beautiful, right? So what
Mm-hmm.
Japanese potters do, and it's such a metaphor for life and the brokenness, when we think of this idea of Marianne Williamson, this best-selling author says, we are all broken, and that's how the light shines through. So you take the
Mm.
Japanese potter now, this master potter who drops a beautiful vase and decides to put it back together with glue and paint the cracks on the vase with gold, like gold paint. And it's this idea as a metaphor of the brokenness is gold, and that's where the light shines through, and that's what we're all about is the cracks and the gold that emanate as a result of the experiences. So I want to ask you one last question. I'll put where people can find you. I'll put all of that in the show notes. But Denzel Washington gave an amazing commencement speech where he talked to this graduating class from Yale or Harvard. And what he talked about was this idea of the ghosts of unfulfilled potential. And he said, you were given talents and strengths and all of these gifts in life, but you never took action on them. And then suddenly you're on your deathbed and you're surrounded by the ghosts of unfulfilled potential who are angry and pissed off at you and resentful because you never acted on the gifts and strengths that you had. So his advice was have no ghosts of unfulfilled potential by your bedside when your time comes. And I didn't know you had four kids. I thought you still had three kids. And I think your son might be 11 now, 11 or 12,
9. Yeah, a
9.
little younger, but yeah. Yeah.
But it's this idea of when you look at your life and your career and everything you've been blessed with, but also everything that you worked tooth and nail to achieve in your life. If one day, hopefully you're around for decades, but if one day your son or your other children are listening to this podcast because they want to find everything they can about you to absorb the person you were, what would you want to say to them in regards to the impact you wanted to have in the world and what you most want them to remember you by?
Um, yeah, that's a so I don't know if I'll be able to put it into words. I want them to remember the feeling that they had when they were around me. That this feeling of confidence in invincibility, but also being humble and kind and please and thank you, mixed with a hold the door for people, but not at your own expense, So, and is it, I don't know, I'm still working on this. I don't know if it's a put yourself first type of mentality or if it's put others first, but I feel like Jim Rome says this, the best thing that I can do for you is work on me. And the best thing that you can
Yeah,
do for me
100%.
is work on you. So, be selfish and don't be afraid to, and comes from Steve Monitor, to dream big. Anything that you think that you want or that might make you happy, that you might want to have in your life, you can get, you know, um, but it's going to take work.
Yeah,
And yeah, yeah, being at peace takes work. It's like it's
it's
the
fucking
hardest
hard.
thing to do, you
Yeah,
know.
exactly. Florence
Yeah.
Nightingale, the famous, well-known nurse from many decades ago, a century ago, said, so little can be achieved in the face of fear.
Mm,
And when we learn to flip fear into an empowering story of impact, that's when we make the ultimate difference. You and I never talked about your professional career on the ice and your Stanley Cups. And, we could have talked about that, but we talked about, I think, in summary, the things that matter most. And the things that matter most are the things that gave you your Stanley Cups, that gave you
yeah.
your journey to speak out about the abuse in the OHL and
Mm-hmm.
to shine the light on all the dysfunction of professional hockey, but to
Mm-hmm.
also embrace the beauty of the sport and what the sport gave you. So, and that's what I appreciate about your story is that, the beauty of professional sport, of sport in general, and what it can provide you, but also the bad side gave you the motivation to pursue a different life and not be defined by the bad things that happened, and taking action and not staying in bed, but taking
Yeah.
action. And that's what I think your God-given talent is as you move forward in your life. So I want to thank you, from the bottom of my heart, for coming on the show and for sharing your story. And I really hope we can stay connected and continue the conversations.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, me too. So thanks for having me, man. That was a good one. That was probably the best interview that anybody's best questions that anybody's ever asked. So
Thank you
good
so
on you.
much. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. So I'm going to close off the show and say goodbye to you. So everybody, thank you very much for listening to this episode with Daniel Carcillo, and I hope you come back to listen to future episodes.